Dependable. Not the kind of love you actually want to build a whole life around. Girl, I stay for the credit score, the house. The moment this business hits 12 months of real revenue, I'm done, gone, clean. And Jamal? He doesn't even know I was in Charlotte last week.
Behind the column, Jamal stood completely still, the flowers still in his grip. This man had given her 9 years, faithfully, quietly, without ever asking for applause. And his wife was describing their marriage like a financial arrangement she was already planning to exit. But what he found 3 days later, on the old laptop she swore was broken, that's when this stopped being a marriage and became something far more calculated than anyone knew. My name is Jamal Brooks. I am 42 years old, and for most of my adult life, I have held on to one belief so simple I never once thought to examine it. If you show up, if you keep your word, if you do the work without needing anyone to applaud it, the people who matter will eventually see it. I built my life around that conviction, the way my father built things, without shortcuts, without announcement. I had a good job managing logistics coordination for a freight operation near Charlotte Douglas International Airport. I had a house in Matthews, North Carolina, on a corner lot where 2 oak trees had been growing since before I moved in. I had a garage where I spent my quiet evenings restoring my late father's 1967 Chevrolet Impala, a project that was never really about the car. And I had my wife, Anaya, 37 years old. Light olive brown skin, sharp hazel eyes, and hair she wore either loose or in a low knot depending on how seriously she wanted to be taken in a room. She wore blazers the way some women wear confidence, like it had always been hers. She had ambition the way some people have a second language, fluently, without effort, always available. I loved her. Not the greeting card version, the real, unglamorous kind. The kind where you know someone's specific moods and small fears, and you choose to stay anyway. What I did not know, what I had no framework to even consider, was that for over a year, my wife had been building a second life alongside ours. Quietly, deliberately, with the patience of someone who had made a decision and was simply waiting for the right moment to execute it. I might have gone on not knowing. Except for one Friday afternoon in November. Except for a bouquet of white lilies from the Harris Teeter on Matthews Township Parkway. Except for the fact that I loved her enough to drive to the airport, even when she told me not to bother. That simple reflex, wanting to see your wife after she'd been away, walked me directly into the truth. Charlotte Douglas on a Friday afternoon runs on a particular kind of energy. I parked in short term and walked in through the main doors, flowers in hand. Anaya had texted me around noon. Don't come in, I'll just Uber. But I was already on the road, and I had already bought the lilies. Later, I would understand what had happened on her end. She had called Zuri Langford from the plane during the final descent, asked her to meet at Carousel 4. She had texted me not to come in and assumed I had listened. In her mind, they had 15 minutes before the car service arrived. She was a careful woman. But careful people have one consistent blind spot. They trust their own plans completely. She had sent the text, therefore I was not here. She was about to be wrong in the most consequential way of her life. I found Carousel 4 without difficulty. Anaya was standing near the far edge of the belt with Zuri Langford. Medium brown skin, natural curls, the kind of open face that seemed always to be mid-laugh. The two of them were pressed close together, talking fast, heads bent. Anaya's posture was different from the one she wore at home, looser, unguarded. The posture of a woman certain no one important is close enough to hear. Something in my chest registered the difference before my mind did. I stepped behind one of those wide advertising columns near the wall and stood completely still. Then I reached into my jacket pocket, opened the voice memo app on my phone, and pressed record. Her first sentence landed like a shift in air pressure. I love Jamal, but it's like loving a cousin. Safe, dependable, but not the kind of love you want to build a whole life around. Zuri gave a small laugh. Not surprised. Familiar. The laugh of someone who had heard this before. I stay because of stability, Anaya continued, her voice steady and almost businesslike. His credit score. The house. Once the Langford Collective has 12 solid months of real revenue, I'm gone. Clean. Derek understands me in a way Jamal never has. He makes me feel like I'm actually alive. Derek. Then, easy and unhurried. He doesn't even know I was in Charlotte last week. He still thinks the whole trip was Los Angeles. The carousel turned. Bags dropped onto the belt. The world continued its ordinary Friday business. I looked down at the white lilies in my hand. I set them gently against the base of the column. Then I pressed stop, put the phone in my pocket, and walked out the way I came in. Steady pace. No one looked at me twice. On the drive back on Providence Road, the rain fell light and unhurried against the windshield. I did not turn on the radio. After a long time, I said one sentence to the empty truck. So, you've been planning this for a long time. Stay with me, because what I found on that old laptop the following week wasn't just evidence. It was the moment I understood exactly how many people already knew, and how long they had all been watching me not know. I have heard people describe the moment they discover a betrayal as a collapse. Everything giving way at once, all of it coming down together. That is not how it happened for me. For me, it was more like a photograph developing in a dark room. Shapes becoming outlines, outlines becoming faces, until what had always existed in that image was finally visible. And once you can see it clearly, you cannot unsee it. Not for a single moment of any day that follows. I drove home that Friday evening and cooked dinner. Chicken and rice, simple. I set the table for two. When Anaya came through the door 40 minutes later, I asked her how Los Angeles was. She told me. Fluently, convincingly, with the easy detail of someone who has rehearsed a story until the telling becomes its own memory. She smiled. She asked about my week. She leaned against the counter the way she had for 9 years. I listened. I nodded. I said, "I'm glad you're home." I meant it, in some old and tired and still true way. But I was also, for the first time in our marriage, watching her. Every reassuring memory becomes a question. Every warm moment becomes evidence to re-examine. And the cruelest part is that you still have to make dinner and set the table and say the right things while it is running. Looking back, I can trace the shape of what I chose not to follow. Last April, Anaya started staying later at her studio space on South Boulevard. I told myself it was the business in its early stages. In June, she changed the password on her phone. A new security habit, she said, after a colleague's account was compromised. I believed her. In August, the easy curiosity she used to bring to our evenings, "How was your day? What happened at the yard?" started to fade. I told myself we were both tired. I saw every one of those shifts. I simply chose to explain them as something other than what they were. I had reached that point at Carousel 4. The Monday after the airport, I called Howard Ellis. Howard is 55, built solid, with the calm, measured voice of a man who has already assessed the situation before saying a word about it. He has practiced family law in Charlotte for nearly 30 years. When I finished walking him through what I had heard and what I had recorded, Howard was quiet for a moment. Then, "Let me check something." Keyboard clicks. A longer pause than I expected. "Jamal." 6 weeks ago, a preliminary motion was filed in Mecklenburg County Superior Court requesting a legal review of a family trust asset, a residential property in Matthews. The petitioner's name on the public record is Anaya Brooks. She filed a public record? A motion to compel disclosure of trust terms, public filing, anyone can pull it. She withdrew it 5 weeks later, once legal counsel confirmed the trust structure made her claim very difficult to prosecute. He paused. She was testing the door. When it didn't open, she withdrew and recalibrated. How long has this been in motion, Howard? At minimum, several months of planning preceded that filing. Document everything you come across naturally. Don't move anything, don't remove anything. But if something is in front of you, photograph it. I said I understood. Then I sat in my truck in the parking lot of a Bojangles on South Tryon Street for 11 minutes without starting the engine. After that, I drove home, smiled at my wife over dinner, and that evening took my father's old composition notebook to the garage and started writing everything down. Dates, amounts, patterns. 3 pages. Then I put the pen down and sat with it. 3 days later, I found the laptop. An older MacBook Anaya had told me stopped working months ago. I found it on the top shelf of the hall closet, behind a box of winter scarves. It powered on without difficulty. Inside a folder named LC Backup, the Langford Collective, I found archived messages between her and Zuri going back more than a year. I read through them with my phone in hand, photographing each screen carefully, the way Howard had instructed. Most of it was ordinary, but near the bottom of a thread dated 14 months earlier, Zuri had written, "Girl, I'm saying this as your best friend. Don't do Jamal like this. He is a genuinely good man. He has always been good to you, and if Mama Dot ever finds out, she will not forgive you for this. I mean it." Anaya had replied 4 minutes later, "Zuri, I love you, but stay in your lane on this one." That was the entire exchange. Zuri had known. For over a year. She had issued a real warning and been told, in 4 words, to stand down. Then kept coming to our Sunday dinners, kept calling me by my first name as though nothing had changed. I closed the laptop and returned it exactly where I found it. Then I went to the nightstand in our bedroom, back corner of the drawer, beneath a small jewelry pouch, a USB drive, thumbnail-sized, black. I copied its entire contents to a password-protected cloud account Anaya didn't know existed, then returned the drive to the exact spot, angle and all. On it was a scanned copy of my father's family trust documents, the spousal inheritance clause highlighted in bright yellow. Not a research reference, a working document. The kind you annotate when you are building a legal argument. I went back to the garage, turned on the work light, and stood with my hands in my pockets, looking at the Impala for a long time. Then I called Howard and said, "I have everything. How do we move?" "Come in tomorrow morning," he said. "We'll start building the file." Before we go any further, I need to ask you directly. Zuri warned Anaya. She knew the truth for over a year and stayed silent. Is she just as responsible? Or was she simply a woman caught between loyalty and conscience, trying to protect a friendship she didn't know how to leave? Drop a yes or no and something you weren't supposed to know and face that choice. I want to hear what you did. Stay with me, because the night I placed that folder on the kitchen table is the night everything Anaya had carefully built began to come apart. There is a particular quiet that settles over a house when something inside it is about to end. Not a dramatic silence, just a specific stillness, the kind that exists in the space between what has been true and what is about to be said out loud for the first time. I had lived in that house in Matthews for 9 years. I knew its sounds the way you know the sounds of a place you have chosen to stay in long enough that it becomes part of your body's memory. The heat clicking on in December, the third stair's specific creak, the faint electrical hum of the kitchen light warming up. I had come to love all of it. Not because any of it was remarkable, but because it was mine, and my father's name was in the foundation underneath it. That Tuesday evening, I set a manila folder on the kitchen table, and I sat down, and I waited. Anaya came in from the living room and stopped. She looked at the folder, then at me. Her face was composed. She was nearly always composed. But something moved behind her eyes that I had not seen there before. A quick, barely visible recalibration. The micro-expression of someone who has just recognized that a room they believed they controlled has shifted without their knowledge. "What is that?" "Sit down," I said. "Please." She sat. She adjusted the sleeve of her blazer. She folded her hands on the table in front of her. That precise, deliberate gesture I had always read as poise and now understood as the physical posture of a person who performs composure when they no longer feel it. I opened the folder. What I had learned from 3 weeks of sitting quietly with what I knew was that clarity is more powerful than volume. You do not need to be loud to be heard completely. You only need to be precise and patient and willing to let each piece of evidence speak before moving to the next. The first document was the bank summary Howard had compiled. $23,400 moved from our joint checking account over 31 months. Many of the transfers had occurred on Fridays, the same Fridays I was running double shifts at the freight yard. I turned it toward her and said nothing. She looked at it without speaking. The second, a hotel receipt, the Westin on West Trade Street in Uptown Charlotte. Single room, 2 nights, charged to a card in her name. The dates corresponded exactly with the week she had told me she was in Los Angeles. I placed it beside the first document. Still said nothing. The third, a printed excerpt from the Zuri message thread, specifically Zuri's warning and Anaya's 4-word reply. I had printed only that exchange, not to dramatize, but because it established one fact that mattered more than all the others. Someone who genuinely loved her had looked her in the face and told her to stop, and she had chosen not to. She looked at that page for a long time. A muscle moved in her jaw. "Anaya," I kept my voice level. "I was at the airport the night you flew back, Carousel 4. I heard everything, and I recorded it." The color left her face in a way I had never witnessed before. Not a flush, an actual draining, as though something had been switched off behind her eyes. "Jamal, you told Zuri you stay with me for the credit score. For stability. That once the Langford Collective had 12 months of real revenue, you would be gone." I paused. "Those are your exact words. I'm not interpreting them." She tried to speak and stopped. Tried again. Stopped again. "The hotel receipt is from the same week as Los Angeles." Silence. "There's a public court filing in Mecklenburg County with your name on it. A motion to review the family trust. You withdrew it 5 weeks after filing when you realized the structure wasn't what you thought it was. The USB drive in your nightstand has the trust documents on it. The spousal clause is highlighted in yellow." This is the moment psychologists call narrative collapse. We all carry an internal story about ourselves, a version of our own behavior that we find acceptable, even justifiable. For someone engaged in systematic deception, that internal story requires constant maintenance. Small, daily reframings that tell them what they are doing is reasonable, necessary, perhaps even deserved. It is an exhausting architecture to sustain. What structured disclosure does is remove the maintenance scaffolding all at once. There is no remaining version of the narrative that holds together. The mind, confronted with that total removal, goes very still. It was the most still I had ever seen Anaya in 9 years of marriage. When she finally spoke, her voice carried something I had never heard in it before. Something without its usual precision. Something genuinely small. "How long have you known?" "Long enough," I said. long enough to be certain I wasn't wrong about any of it. She looked at her hands, then at the folder, then past my shoulder at a point on the wall she couldn't seem to bring into focus. A long silence opened between us. And in that silence, something unexpected happened. She looked at me, really looked, the way she hadn't in longer than I could honestly measure. And she asked, quietly, "Did you ever want me to stay?" I held her gaze for a moment. The question was real. I could hear that it was real. "I wanted the woman I thought I married to stay," I said. "But that woman and the plan you've been running for the last year, those aren't the same person. And I think you've known that longer than I have." She had no answer. There wasn't one available that was honest. "My attorney will be filing this week," I said. "You'll want to retain someone quickly." I closed the folder. I stood up. I left the kitchen without hurrying. In the garage, I turned on the work light above the Impala and stood there with my hands in my pockets. Not fighting anything, not holding anything back, simply finished, and learning what finished felt like in a body that had been braced for a very long time. In the days that followed, something textbook happened, and I want you to understand exactly what it was, because if you have ever been through something like this, you may have seen it without knowing its name. Anaya became warm. She cooked meals she hadn't cooked in years, the shrimp and grits she used to make on Sunday mornings when we first moved into the house, the cornbread from a recipe her grandmother had written on an index card. She touched my arm when she passed me in the hallway. She asked about my day with a careful, deliberate attentiveness. Psychologists call this post-exposure love bombing, and it is one of the most psychologically complex behaviors that surfaces in the aftermath of betrayal. It looks exactly like genuine remorse. It feels like a turning point. But at its core, it is a final attempt at damage control. Tenderness deployed not from a change of heart, but from the recognition that the ground is moving, and charm is the last tool remaining. The hardest part is that it looks precisely like what you always wanted the marriage to be. I was kind to her. I remained present in the house. I did not tell her I had already filed. Because a man who is clear, not angry, not vindictive, simply clear, does not need to announce what he has already decided. He simply moves forward, quietly, the way he has always moved. Howard called on a Thursday morning. "The separation date is established and documented. Everything is in order." "Good," I said. And that same evening, Anaya came home with bright eyes and genuine excitement, telling me the Langford Collective was holding its official launch event the following Saturday. An event space on North Tryon Street in Uptown Charlotte. Clients, potential vendors, community members, family. She wanted it to feel like a real debut, she said. Something that announced what she was building. She asked, warmly and without any apparent hesitation, whether I would come. I said, "Of course I'll come." Don't go anywhere, because what happened when I walked into that room on North Tryon Street is the moment this story stopped being about a marriage and became something that neither Anaya nor the man sitting beside her could ever take back. The event space on North Tryon Street was the kind of venue that makes ambition look like it has already succeeded. Exposed brick walls, track lighting angled with care, servers moving through the crowd with sparkling water and white wine on small trays. At the far end, a projector screen displayed the Langford Collective's logo, geometric, clean, genuinely well designed. Whatever else I knew about the situation, I recognized that Anaya had real gifts for this. She had always known how to make a room believe in something. I arrived quietly, shook a few hands near the entrance, accepted a glass of water. Dark navy suit, well fitted. I had shined my shoes that afternoon while the Impala's final coat dried in the garage. No performance, just presence. I read the room quickly, the way you read any space you have entered with a purpose. Derek Whitaker was near the far wall, working a small cluster of guests with practiced ease. Slim vest, silver threading at his temples. The particular smile of a man who had discovered early that charm could open most rooms. He didn't look at me when I walked in. If he recognized me, he chose not to show it. Anaya was at the front, moving through the crowd with fluid, executive warmth. Every gesture calibrated. Hair down. She wore the blazer she had bought specifically for presentations. The structured one in deep burgundy that she believed made her look both serious and approachable. She had always been right about that. And in the third row of chairs, seated with the particular stillness of a woman who occupies space entirely by intention, was Celeste Langford. 68 years old. Silver-white hair worn close and neat. Pearl earrings she had worn to every occasion that carried meaning in her life. A face that held the particular authority of someone who has spent decades watching people carefully and has rarely been wrong about what they were actually doing. She met my eyes when I walked past her row. She nodded once, not warmly, not coldly, deliberately. The nod of a woman who had already made several assessments and was waiting to see whether the evening confirmed them. I nodded back. I found a position near the side wall with a clear sightline to the front of the room, and I waited. I want to take a moment here to explain why Celeste Langford mattered, not only as Anaya's mother, but as a specific and significant force in what was about to happen. Sociologists who study community-embedded families use the term reputational anchor to describe individuals whose standing is so established and whose public identity is so thoroughly built around specific values that their response to a breach carries weight far beyond their personal opinion. Celeste had spent 40 years building something real in this part of Charlotte. Her name held meaning at charitable fundraisers, on the boards of 2 community nonprofits, in the pews of her church, where people who had known her for decades trusted her judgment without needing to verify it. When she spoke publicly, rooms listened, not because of volume, but because of 4 decades of absolute consistency. She had said it plainly, more than once, at more than one community gathering over the years. Everything else you lose in this life, you can find your way back from. Your honor is the only thing that, once you give it away, you cannot buy back.
Anaya had grown up hearing those words. She had simply calculated that her mother's loyalty to family would outweigh her principles when the moment came. That calculation was the most consequential error she made in an evening that would be defined by its errors. Anaya took the microphone at 7:30. She spoke for 12 minutes about vision, about what the Langford Collective was built to do for the communities she had grown up watching be overlooked, about the years of preparation that had gone into reaching this room, about what it meant to finally be here. She was compelling, fully present in the way speakers are when they genuinely believe in the moment they have constructed for themselves.
The applause that followed was real and warm. The MC invited brief remarks from family and friends in attendance. I raised my hand. Anaya saw me. She smiled, the public smile, gracious and assured, and gestured me forward with complete openness. She had every reason to feel confident. I was the steady husband, the reliable man, the one who always showed up. She was right about that last part. I stood near the back wall for a moment before walking forward, and I looked around the room one more time. The vendors, the potential clients, a woman from a West Charlotte neighborhood association who had come because she believed in what Anaya said she was building. People who were preparing to invest their trust, their professional time, their community credibility into a narrative I knew had been constructed on a foundation that did not exist. I was not doing what I was about to do for myself. My own life was already decided. I had already filed. My own peace was not in question. But these people, they were about to build something on top of a story they had not been given the full version of. And if I walked out without saying anything, the only version they would ever receive would be hers. I walked to the microphone. I thanked the room. I acknowledged the genuine effort that had gone into the evening. Then I said there was something I had been carrying for a while, and that the people gathered here, family, clients, partners, community, deserved to hear it directly from me. I reached into my jacket pocket and pressed play. What I did at that microphone has a name in behavioral research: public accountability disclosure. One of the most psychologically significant acts available in cases of systematic, long-term deception. Private confrontation, as I had done at the kitchen table, addresses the relationship between two people. Public disclosure addresses the narrative a person has built for the world. For someone whose professional credibility, family standing, and community identity rest on a carefully constructed false story, public disclosure is not simply embarrassing. It is structurally destabilizing in a way that no private conversation can replicate. The room becomes the witness. The recording becomes testimony that no subsequent reframing can reach. The first sounds from the phone were ambient: the baggage claim level at Charlotte Douglas, the soft, rolling friction of luggage wheels on tile, the low mechanical hum of the carousel. Then her voice, clear, unguarded, completely unaware of being preserved. I love Jamal, but it's like loving a cousin, safe, dependable, but not the kind of love you want to build a whole life around. The room shifted. I felt it before I saw it, that specific collective transition from social ease into complete, suspended stillness. Zuri's voice, soft, a knowing laugh. I stay because of stability, his credit score, the house. Once the Langford Collective hits 12 months of real revenue, I'm gone. Clean. Derek understands me in a way Jamal never has. Someone in the middle rows stopped moving entirely. A server near the side wall stood motionless, a tray held at chest height. And then the section none of them had heard. The part I had kept specifically for this room. I've already done the prep work. If I need to, I'll challenge the family trust. And Mama? A small, private laugh. Mama will understand once I explain it. She always comes around. I pressed stop. 3 full seconds of silence. The kind of silence that is not quiet at all. Then, from the third row, Celeste Langford stood up. She was not a physically imposing woman, but standing in that room, in that moment, she occupied every inch of it, the way genuine moral authority does, without requiring announcement or volume. She straightened the lapel of her jacket with one deliberate motion. She looked at her daughter across the length of that room with an expression I will not try to improve upon, because there is no language precise enough for what it carried. When she spoke, her voice did not waver, did not rise. It simply carried, clean and clear to every corner of that brick room. From this night forward, you are no longer my daughter. She picked up her handbag. She walked to the aisle, and she walked out. What Celeste did in that moment is what family systems researchers call public boundary assertion, the most socially powerful act available to a reputational anchor in a moment of communal betrayal. She did not ask for explanation. She did not offer negotiation or the possibility of a private conversation. She stated a conclusion, enacted it in front of witnesses, and removed herself. In doing so, she communicated to every person in that room, clients, vendors, community members, Derek Whitaker, that the social infrastructure undergirding Anaya's credibility had formally and permanently withdrawn its support. Rooms are very good at reading that kind of signal. This room read it immediately. 2 vendors near the entrance exchanged a look and rose from their chairs. Derek Whitaker was already moving toward the side exit, the practiced smile entirely absent, replaced by the blank, forward focus of a man calculating his losses. Zuri, seated near the back, had both hands pressed flat over her mouth. Anaya stood at the front of the room. She did not collapse. I want to be precise about that. She stayed on her feet. But everything she had carried into that room an hour earlier was gone. The executive warmth, the calibrated openness, the assembled version of herself she had spent months preparing for this debut. Gone. She looked at me across that space. I held her gaze for a moment. Not with triumph, not with coldness, with the quiet, finished recognition of a man who had loved his wife genuinely and been met in return with a plan. Then I set the microphone back in the stand, buttoned my jacket, and walked out through the front door onto North Tryon Street. The November air was cold and clean. Charlotte moved around me, continuous, indifferent, full of its own purposes. I had parked 2 streets over. I walked there at my normal pace. I did not feel triumphant. That is the truth. I felt finished. And finished, I had learned, is a different thing entirely. Quieter than triumph, and more durable. Stay right there, because the months that followed that night will show you exactly what it costs to build your future on another person's loyalty, while planning to discard them the moment they've served their purpose. North Carolina law requires that a married couple live separately for 1 full year before a court will grant a divorce. The night after the kitchen table confrontation, I moved my things to the spare bedroom. Howard noted the date and time. That was the clock starting, not with a dramatic announcement, not with a scene. Just a man carrying his clothes down the hall and closing a door quietly behind him. Howard filed that date as the official start of our separation. Everything that followed was built on that foundation. The separation year was not what I had imagined difficulty would look like. It was quieter than that. It was 2 people living inside a structure that had already ended, maintaining the practical shape of a household for the purpose of legal process and paperwork. Anaya spent most of her time at the studio space on South Boulevard, building what she was building. I went to work. I went to the garage. I went to the community center on Thursday evenings. The house held both of us in it without drama, the way a house does when the people inside it have already made their decisions and are simply waiting for the calendar to catch up. When the 12 months were complete, Howard filed. The proceedings moved with surprising efficiency after that, because the documentation was thorough, the trust structure was sound, and Anaya's own attorney, once he reviewed the full evidence file, advised her that a contested proceeding would cost significantly more than it could realistically recover. She signed. I signed. It was done. There is a psychological experience that follows the resolution of long-term betrayal, and it deserves to be named, because most people who have lived through something like this lack language for what they feel afterward, and the absence of language makes it harder to move through. Researchers call it post-betrayal identity reconstruction, the slow, disorienting work of rebuilding a sense of self that was partly organized around a relationship that turned out to be built on false premises. It is not simply grief, though grief is woven through it. It is the deeper, stranger work of determining which parts of who you became inside that marriage were genuinely yours, and which parts were shaped by a context that no longer exists. For me, that work happened mostly in a garage. With a 1967 Chevrolet Impala, my father's tools, and the particular silence of a space where nothing needed to be explained or managed or performed. That kind of quiet, hands-on labor is not a retreat from processing. It is a form of it. You are rebuilding something real and tangible while something internal rebuilds alongside it, following the same patient logic. The Langford Collective closed 4 months after the launch event on North Tryon Street. I heard it from a neighbor one morning in passing, the casual way neighborhood news travels. 2 of the vendors who had been in early partnership discussions had made their decision in real time on that Saturday evening and had not revisited it. Word travels efficiently in professional communities, especially smaller ones where reputation functions as currency and where people remember clearly what they witnessed with their own eyes. Derek Whitaker lost a significant logistics contract with a distribution firm in the south end of Charlotte. I had no involvement in that outcome. Some consequences do not require engineering. They follow from behavior, the way water finds its level. Not immediately, not dramatically, but with a quiet inevitability that cannot be negotiated around. I did not track any of this with particular attention. When I heard about it, it registered, and then I went back to what I was doing. The genuine marker of recovery is not satisfaction at someone else's losses. It is the peaceful indifference of a person whose own life has become engaging again on its own terms. I was moving toward that, day by day, in the only way I knew how to move toward anything, steadily, without announcement. Zuri Langford came to my door on an afternoon in late March. I had sensed, in a quiet way, that she eventually would. She was not a woman built for the long-term weight of sustained silence. Her conscience was genuine, not convenient, not selective. And genuine consciences do not stay quiet indefinitely. They find their way to the surface eventually. She stood on my front porch with her hands folded in front of her. She told me she owed me an apology, that she had known more than she ever said, and for longer than she had let on. That she had been carrying the weight of that silence ever since the night of the launch event, when she had sat in the back of that room with her hands over her mouth and understood fully, for the first time, the cost of what she had chosen not to do. She told me that after that evening, her friendship with Anaya had ended. Not dramatically, simply dissolved, the way things dissolve when the pretense holding them together is finally gone. She told me her family had heard what happened. She told me she was sorry. I listened to all of it. Zuri, I said, I appreciate you coming. I mean that. She waited. But I don't need to hear more of it, I said, quietly, without any edge in it. What happened, happened. You made the choices you made, she made hers, I made mine. We've all landed where we've landed. And you came here, which matters. But I'm done looking backward. She nodded. Her eyes were bright in the way eyes get when tears are close, but the person is holding them back by will. I hope you find what you're looking for, I said. And I meant it. Not as a dismissal, as a genuine wish for someone who had clearly been carrying something heavy and had finally decided to put part of it down. I closed the door gently, and I went back to the garage. Not with coldness, with completion. A week after Zuri's visit, a vendor who had been in early discussions with Anaya's business sent me a text. Someone I had met briefly at an industry conference the previous spring. He said he had heard things early on that caused him to question my professional character. He said he now understood that had been wrong, and he hoped there might be a way to make it right professionally if I was open to it. I read it twice. I set the phone face down on the workbench. My professional reputation had never rested on what people said about me in rooms I wasn't in. It rested on the work I actually did, on the freight coordination I handled with precision, on the young men I drove to the community center on Thursday evenings to help them understand that logistics and supply chain management were skills that could change the direction of a life, on the promises I kept, because I believed a kept promise is the simplest and most durable building material a life can be made of. None of that had shifted. None of it needed external repair. It only needed to be continued. I turned the phone over. I went back to the Impala. It was almost done. I could hear it in the engine's voice, settled and even, like something that had finally remembered what it was built to do. Don't go anywhere, because what happened on an ordinary April morning in that garage is the moment I understood that some things don't end simply because you've decided you are finished with them. The morning I finished the Impala, Charlotte offered the kind of April day that feels less like weather and more like a deliberate gift. Clear sky, that early spring light that makes everything look like it has been washed clean and placed carefully back where it belongs. The garage door was all the way up, a soft wind moving through from the east. Cut grass, motor oil, the faint sound of a lawnmower 2 streets over. Everything ordinary, everything exactly right. I had been up since 6, Made coffee in the old percolator my father gave me when I moved into my first apartment, the kind that takes its time and makes no apology for it. I brought the mug out to the garage and stood there and looked at the car. It was finished. Burgundy interior, deep and right. Engine clean and even. Every line true to what it had been in 1967. Because to take a shortcut on something your father had loved would be its own form of betrayal. The chrome caught the morning light exactly as it should when someone has given it the patience it requires. My father would have walked around it once, slowly, said almost nothing, then offered one nod, the nod that contained everything it needed to, without needing to be anything more. I was thinking about that nod when my phone buzzed on the workbench. An unfamiliar number, Charlotte area code. I almost let it go to voicemail. I had been sitting inside the earned kind of quiet that morning, the kind that arrives when you have come through something real and your body is just beginning to understand that you are going to be genuinely fine. But I answered. Jamal. Howard Ellis. That preloading tone he used when the next sentence required your full attention. 4 days after the launch event, Anaya filed a formal motion to challenge the family trust under a spousal interest framework. I set my coffee down. 4 days after? Filed the following Thursday. When the business collapsed and the relationship with Whitaker ended in the same week, the trust became the last remaining asset worth pursuing. She reached for the one thing she had been studying from the beginning. A pause. The motion is not strong. Your father's attorney was exceptionally thorough. But it requires a formal response. Can you come in Thursday? Researchers who study what they call desperate asset pursuit find it is less about the asset itself and more about the need to retain some form of agency when all other forms have been removed. When everything else is gone, the last legal claim becomes the last thing a person can control. It is not rational strategy. It is the final move of someone who cannot yet accept that the game is over. Thursday, I said. I'll be there. The foundation your father built holds, Jamal. I know it does, I said. We hung up. I walked to the end of the driveway and stood in the April morning with my coffee. I looked at the 2 oak trees at the corner of the lot, the ones my father never got to see fully grown. There would be more Thursday mornings in Howard's office, more things to hold steadily while also holding everything else. That was fine. I had held harder things, and I was still standing in my own driveway, in April light, with the car my father left me, finally finished, and waiting. I went back to the garage, settled into the driver's seat, felt the engine idling beneath me, smooth and even and exactly right. Then I backed out, pointed it toward the street, and let it find its pace. No particular destination, just the open road and the engine running clean, and Charlotte spreading out around me on a bright April morning. Entirely indifferent to one man finally feeling like the road ahead was genuinely, completely his. This story teaches us something quiet and specific. A good man is not one who never gets fooled. He is one who, when the truth finally surfaces, does not become the worst version of himself in response. He does not perform his pain for an audience. He does not chase consequences he does not control. He goes back to the garage. He picks up the work his father left him. He shows up Thursday evening for the young men counting on him to be there. If you love someone like that, a son, a grandson, a man who has always been steady without needing credit for it, tell him this week. Not in a card, in person, over the phone, at the kitchen table. Tell him specifically, I see how you carry yourself. I see what it costs, and I am proud of you. Those words, said plainly, cost nothing, and they are worth everything. These scripts are born from genuine human creativity and a desire to confront social truths. AI acted as a co-pilot, helping organize thoughts so that powerful messages of fairness, forgiveness, and human potential could touch hearts worldwide. Production, character development, and visual conceptualization. by passionate team